Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to CoachX Conversations with the Institute of Coaching. My name is Jeffrey Hull. I am the Executive Director at the Institute of Coaching, and I am super excited for today's show as I have the best-selling author of The Unspoken Rules, Secrets to Starting Your Career Off Right, who is Gorick, who is coming to us from Harvard and Berkeley and recently off a very lengthy book tour with his super successful new book. And so we are really excited to have Gorick with us today to talk about how to get your career off to a really great start. And before I give you a little bit more about his background and get started on my questions, I want to just encourage, let's see if our comments section is working. So say hello in the comment section and let us know where you're from and when you're, what time of day it is for you. So for some of you, it will be good evening and good morning, good afternoon. Comments are not coming in yet, so I'm going to go ahead and just get started. I'm sure they will start to float in, hopefully. But let me tell you a little bit about Gorick if you're not familiar with him. He is a guide. He's a guide that helps professionals, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, to take control of their careers and ascend to positions of leadership. His book is based on over 500 interviews with professionals across multiple geographies, industries, and job types. And I can attest, having read the book, that he covers a lot of territory, unbelievable number of case studies and interviews. I mean, he really covers a huge landscape of the employment world with this book. He is currently a career advisor still at Harvard, where he specializes in coaching first-generation low-income students. He's also on the faculty at the University of California in Berkeley, so he commutes back and forth across the country, where he teaches this theme of the unspoken rules of career navigation. So I am really excited to be with you here today. I have to say that when I first picked up your book and I started reading it, I was a little bit, because I'm in the older generations. I'm not kicking off my career, so I was a little skeptical, and I thought, this is going to be one of those, what they don't teach you at Harvard Business School books, which probably came out when I was just starting. But I have to say, I was totally absorbed. It took me down the rabbit hole of my career and thinking of so many of my clients. And, after reading it, I just came away thinking, oh my God, I wish I had this book when I did start my career. But it's super valuable even now. So we are really excited to have you with us here at the Institute of Coaching, Gorick. I want to welcome you. And I now see that our chat is working, so we can say hello from folks from all over. So welcome, everyone, and welcome to you, Gorick.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you to the Institute of Coaching for having me. And thank you all. I'm also, if you ever see me looking down in my screen, it's because I'm reading all of your comments. Andrew, nice to see you again. Luca, Dina, wow, Stefan, Angie, Cindy, amazing to see this amount of turnout from all around the world. I'm seeing folks from Cincinnati, from London, from Pennsylvania, from Boston, from Argentina. My goodness, thanks so much for spending this time with me.
Yeah, it's really great. It's always a wonderfully global audience. And I think, as you know, and you and I talked about, our audience tends to be coaches, career coaches, leadership coaches, all different types. But I think what's particularly relevant about what you wrote about in this book is that today's workforce, today's workplace is so much more diverse than it has been historically. And much earlier in folks' careers are they stepping up into leadership roles. They're working in a much more fluid, as we know, hybrid kind of work environment. So the idea of learning sort of the secrets to be successful earlier in your career is really key. And I'd love to start with having you share with us a little bit of your background. Because in a sense, I feel like you sort of wrote this book as a retrospective of your own experience. And then you went out and you interviewed lots of people to make sure that it was truly evidence-based. But give us a little bit of the background. What prompted you to want to put this book out?
Well, you're spot on, Jeff. It was as a result of my own trial and error. I went from school to work, and I thought, hey, I got good grades in school. I got in at this organization. I'm all set. It's kind of like when we get into a school or a program that we wanted to get into. And it was at that point that I realized that these unspoken rules, as I call them, have only just begun. Where I still remember on my first day in corporate America, I was still setting up my laptop and my email. I was sitting beside a colleague of mine who had just been hired at the same time. And then one of the senior members of the firm walks down the hall, knocks on the glass that separates us in the hallway, and then says, "Hi, are you Chelsea?" Who is my colleague. And then Chelsea says, "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" At which point the senior person said, "Well, let's get lunch sometime." At which point I thought, this is amazing. The higher ups in this organization are so invested in our careers that they're willing to take time out of their busy schedules to grab lunch with newcomers like us. This is amazing. Of course, I then realized pretty quickly that this wasn't an open invitation. It was an invite only invitation. It was because Chelsea, my colleague, had been introduced to someone at the firm, and one connection led to another, led to another, led to another. An email turned to a phone call turned to an in-person meeting, an in-person meeting turned to a lunch. And fast forward several additional weeks, and Chelsea found her way to high-profile projects that weren't advertised to the rest of us.
Wow.
And then fast forward some more, and she had meetings with senior members. She was flying all around the world. She was doing really cool work. And I was, in the meantime, putting my head down, doing the hard work as my working class single mom had taught me to do, and not seeing the results that I wanted. And you mentioned the word secrets, and yeah, it felt like they were a set of secrets that no one had told me about. But to someone who had been steeped in this culture of the white collar corporate world, this was just common sense that
Right.
doing your work is only part of your work. You actually have to go out there, build relationships, sell yourself, sell your ideas. And this is what this book, The Unspoken Rules, is all about.
Yeah, no, I think it's so interesting that you had that experience early on, and it must have been like a light bulb went off for you, realizing that, oh, there's something behind the curtain here that everyone else is getting access to except me. And what I love about what you did in your research and taking it to a real deep level of exploration around what is going on in corporate America, what really makes the difference in organizations, is that you really put a focus on perception is in many ways reality, right? And you do that in a number of different domains in terms of how we show up, how we manage our time, how we interact with through email, all the different modalities, all that. And I think that that's a really important lesson, and that I'm still learning even to this day with the team and with my clients, which is we always sort of knock ourselves on the head, why isn't X, Y, and Z working, or why am I not getting through? And it's because your perception of reality is different from whoever's on the other side. And so one of the things that I'd love to have you share a little bit about is your 3 C's, because I think that that's a really powerful summary of this sort of broader rubric around how we perceive each other in the workplace, and how you can, as you said, know the secret to get through the walls or get through the curtains. So share about the 3 C's.
Sure thing. Well, the 3 C's stand for competence, commitment, and compatibility. And it's the framework that is the North Star for the entire book, where if you understand what it takes to demonstrate these 3 C's, you will build trust, you will unlock opportunity, and you'll set yourself up for a hopefully fulfilling and successful career. So the idea is this: the minute you show up, whether it's in an email, in a coffee chat, in a client meeting, in a one-on-one with your manager, the people around you are sizing you up, and they're asking themselves 3 questions. The first question is, can you do this job well? Which is the question of, are you competent? The second question is, are you excited to be here? Which is the question of, are you committed? And the third question is the question of, do we get along? Which is the question of, are we compatible? So are you competent? Are you committed? And are you compatible? The 3 C's. Your job, and frankly, all of our jobs, and this includes the CEO of the organization, the executive director, it's to demonstrate that you are in fact competent, committed, and compatible all the time. And in the book, I talk about what this looks like on conference calls and emails, and when you're asking for a promotion. But the idea really does come back to something that you mentioned just now, which is that perceptions don't always equal reality. Where if I think back to my mom and the type of work that she worked in as a sewing machine operator, her productivity, the quality of her work as well, was easily discernible. So all you needed to do to determine whether she was a good sewing machine operator is she sewing enough garments? How high is the stack of clothes that are to her right? And are those zippers sewed on correctly?
Right.
And just by looking at her output, you're able to discern whether she's a good employee. However, that's not the case for many white collar jobs, especially in this digital era where you're working in teams, you're working on long duration projects, you're contributing one piece to a much bigger mosaic, and you have to manage stakeholders, you have to manage clients, you have to manage expectations. And so you have good intent, I know that, but your intent doesn't necessarily match up with your impact, where others might see you as being less competent, committed, and compatible than you intend to come across. And it's little things. I unfortunately sometimes find myself getting into a debate of sorts with some organizations that say, unspoken rules don't exist around here.
Sure, they don't.
And at which point I'm like, I kind of lost this conversation before it even began. But the reality is, if there's people, there's politics. Then if there's politics, there's subjectivity. And if there's subjectivity, there's going to be this unlevel playing field. So this is especially important in this remote and hybrid work environment, because this isn't my concept. This is proven with a lot of organizational psychology research and sociology research, where there is this notion called proximity bias, where we tend to like and think more highly of the things and the people that we're more exposed to. So if you're a leader and you're thinking about who to promote or to give this high profile assignment to, there's a higher likelihood that you'd look left, look right, and think, oh, I've seen this person show up in the office.
Yeah, they're in the hallway, so I should get to know them.
Exactly.
As opposed to the person who's on the video, right?
And so that's an example of this unspoken rule where really all organizations are still trying to figure out, how do we create this level playing field if we're increasingly working in this hybrid and remote work environment? That's just one of the many unspoken rules out there that can impact your 3 C's.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, it's funny to hear you say that an organization would say we don't have unspoken rules, because what I experience is exactly the opposite, that there are so many unspoken rules, and they are in fact so micro in many cases, like really level detail, that even the most sophisticated employees of the organization, or even the CEO of the organization, is not always aware of how that culture has built up over time, with all their little hidden agendas and stories and myths, and the way we do it around here, and we only wear this kind of collar, and we only wear this kind of shoes. And anyway, I want to just encourage folks, during our last 10-15 minutes or so, we're happy to take your questions. So if you're a career coach or a leadership coach working on these kinds of issues with your clients, toss a question in the comment section and we'll try to get to it. And one of the things that I loved about your book, Gorick, is that you told a lot of different stories and cases of folks, of people of color, people with different cultural backgrounds, people of different geographical national backgrounds. And one of the things that was really noticeable is that you played a really nice fine line with a lot of your framing, that you don't have to give up your core values or who you are as an individual, your background, your culture, your race, whatever. You don't have to become what the organization requires secretly or transparently, but you do have to make a choice once you're aware of it. And I love the fact that it's very values driven throughout your book. And you have a lot of different questions and assessments for people to decide, what am I willing to change to fit in? Right? So say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, this speaks to the notion of compatibility, the 3rd C. And frankly, this was the hardest chapter to to write, because and it's honestly the interviews that I had, and as I dug into the literature more, the more I dug into this topic, the more I learned from this topic, and
Mm,
the more I realized that there isn't a hard and fast rule for many of these decisions,
right.
and that it's a matter of personal values. There's not a clear right or wrong. And so whether it's a matter of how much do you anglicize your name,
Yeah,
do you do you choose to change your outfit, do you change the pronunciation of your name, do you change the look of your hair? So many of these subtle details can and often do impact how others see you.
that's right.
And whereas I remember back when I was first starting out, I was given the advice of, well, if you're going to work in this job, you have really two options. You can wear a light blue colored shirt or a white colored shirt. And there were all of these rules. And
But
for
sometimes they're
women,
not actually said out loud, right? You have to pick them up. That's one thing you pointed out in the book a lot, is it's more be a very careful observer of the culture.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I got a lot of hard and fast rules. And regrettably, given the unlevel playing field that exists, women get especially large numbers of these these sometimes spoken rules that we need to be questioning.
Right.
Um, right down to the jewelry and the types of shoes and things like that. And as I expanded my own thinking on this topic, as I was doing this research, I came to develop a framework that has 3 concentric circles. And I still stand behind this today,
Great.
because I think this is the most authentic way of thinking about how to demonstrate one's compatibility. Where in the innermost circle, you have what you hold sacred. One ring outside of that is what you're willing to negotiate. And then one ring outside of that is what you're indifferent about. And different people are going to put different things inside of each of these circles. So in my book, I talk about an African American woman who had strong feelings about retaining her name. And so when colleagues of hers
That's
would
right. I
ask if
remember
she
that.
went by a nickname, she would gently but also firmly help her colleagues pronounce her name. Something that she was a little bit more indifferent about was the way in which she styled her hair. Now, when I heard that story, if I had just heard that one story, it would have been easy to jump to the conclusion of, oh, well, everyone's got to live life this way.
Yeah. You should hold on to your name. You should be declaring, yeah, don't give in to the corporate. Yeah.
Right. But then I speak to someone else right after that interview, and I
Yep.
realize actually someone else in the exact same profession had the very opposite point of view towards how they should be showing up. And so for the coaches in the audience, if you find yourself wrestling with your clients about how to show up authentically, it may be worth a conversation about what does your client, what does your advisee hold sacred? What are they willing to negotiate if the benefits outweigh the costs? And what are the things that they might be indifferent about? And that's a matter of personal values.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right on that. You're basically discussing with all of these different folks that you interviewed, where were they willing to blend into the organization, and how did that work for them, and how do they hold on to what they really care most about and still be successful? And I think you articulated it really, really well. We're getting a couple good questions, so let's take a question that it's anonymous, so we'll just assume that they're engaged. But says this individual says, I coach a lot of mid-career Asian people in the pharmaceutical industry, and they're curious if you have any specific recommendations for coaching or career in that community. And given that you come from that community, maybe that's something that you can speak to.
Sure thing. Well, mid-career and Pan-Asian and pharma. So let me,
That's a good combination,
this is
right?
very specific. So when it comes to mid-career folks, what I often find is the question of, am I even going down the right path?
Mm,
And also the question of, have I made the choices or have I set myself up to demonstrate my 3 Cs?
mm,
Let me be very specific. So I've talked to a number of mid-career professionals who say, I've read your book. I now am aware of these 3 C's. But when I think about how I've been coming across over the last decade in this role, I've set up a pattern of behavior such that people don't expect me to speak up. I've set up a
Mm,
pattern of behavior where I don't really offer my point of view. I've offered a pattern of behavior where I show up late or I look disengaged or whatever it is. And the question that I often receive is, well, is it too late for me? I-
yeah. Yeah.
Do I are you saying that I should quit and start afresh at a new organization where I don't
Someplace where
have
they
the
don't know me, right?
right? Or do I choose to go down this path? And I don't know to what extent the anonymous contributor here has faced this question, but it's really a question of how willing and able are you to set up a new pattern of behavior where do you have a relationship with your manager and your team members where you can go back and say, I was reflecting upon um, how I've been contributing to meetings over the last few weeks or even just over the last while. And I was doing some self-reflection, and I feel like I could have done a better job of not just saying the facts, but also offering my point of view. I'd love to get your input and your guidance on how I can improve, or if there's other areas that that I should be considering. And for those who are eager to stay in the organization, even just having that conversation and prompting it shows a degree of self-awareness
Right.
that demonstrates your commitment and your compatibility. That, hey, this person seems like someone who's coachable. This seems like someone who's eager to improve themselves. Now, there are a lot of context specific considerations here that we can't really get into,
Right.
but the idea of these 3 C's is it's most recent and most consistent. So it's a matter of have you been doing this all along, and can your more recent impressions drown out the prior pattern of behavior that you may have exhibited? And if the answer is no, and or if maybe you're stuck in a role or an organization that isn't quite aligned with your values or isn't set up to enable you to succeed, then maybe it is time to look for another opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's really, really well stated that you have to keep in mind, whether it's early career or mid-career, that, changing perceptions once you're within an organizational dynamic is not easy to do. As coaches, myself and probably many of the folks in this audience are actually charted with doing that with our clients. So we are exploring, are they aware of how they come across, no matter where they are in their career? And if they need to step up and they want to be more successful, they often have to make big change. And I will often ask my clients if they're willing to step into the kind of like shock the system modality where they may need to wake people up to the point where they notice.
Right.
It's really interesting when my clients start to make a change. So I'm working with a female Asian American who says she's an introvert. She comes from an introverted culture, so to speak, but she wants to be a trainer. She's up in front. She wants to move from the back to the front. I said, well, are you ready to shock the system? Because in a sense, that's what's required. And yet, when the answer is yes, I'm ready to shock the system will bend for her. It will actually respond. And it actually really works, but she has to get herself ready to recognize that people are actually going to come right up to her, literally and not just figuratively, and say, are you okay? I'm not used to you like taking the stage or being the first one on the video. And then you have to be prepared. And this is where your book comes really helpful in terms of your communication style, and to be prepared to say, yeah, I've really been so excited about this new opportunity to be in a training modality, and that I got a coach, and I'm starting to really do some, stepping into making presentations. So I'm glad you actually noticed. Isn't that great? And usually your colleague will turn around and be like, wow, I want to do that. Right. They're usually supportive. They may be caught off guard, but they're usually supportive if they get the sense of why and where you're coming from.
I love that, the notion of shocking the system. And you have a great excuse right now for those of you tuning in live. It's still the beginning of the year. yeah, in corporate speak, you don't really say Happy New Year anymore, but you can still share that, hey, I've been reflecting over the holidays about where I could improve and where I'd like to take my career next. And you have a great excuse, long story short, in
Yeah, and
terms of
there's a
saying,
great
this is
section in
something
your
I'm
book.
focusing on this year.
Yeah, there's a great section in your book. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but
No,
I
no, no.
just get excited about the feedback. Please, if you get Gorick's book, read the section on feedback. It's really well done. The questions, I mean, for coaches, one of the things that's great about your book is it's filled with great questions. And in fact, there's a whole section for the new career, for the newbie in their career, to how to ask, right? How to ask a really good question. And I love, one of the things I love is you said, always have a question. It's
Yep.
really, really great. So in terms of helping coaches, I don't think it can get much better. So we do have one question that I like from Terry, who's asking, he's coaching a newcomer, wants to know whether he should give that individual your book right away or let them go through a few cycles of learning before and have them be able to reflect back on what worked and what didn't.
Jeff, this speaks to, we only had a few seconds to catch up before going live here, but we were just talking,
Right.
funny enough, about how hard it can be sometimes to sell preventative medicine. And it
Right.
really
Right.
depends on the individual, where some folks are eager and willing to take guidance, even if it's proactively given to them, even if they haven't yet had the lived experience to know that this is even something they should be thinking about. Others, and I'm sure many of you tuning in, are probably also working with coachees and clients who have to fail a little bit, and ideally in a low stakes environment where it's not catastrophic, but
Right.
that they have to have lived it and seen it to believe it. And so to the individual who asked this question, I think there's a bit of diagnosis that you might have to do around how receptive this individual is. If this individual is particularly conscientious about learning how things work before embarking upon it for the first time, this may be the right time to be introducing this material.
Right.
However, if they're the I'll just figure it out and I'll ask you questions later type, then it might be a different situation. But what I like to try and do, and I try to do this in the classroom, is offer as many low stakes way for folks to, I don't like the word fail, but at least try something and to have that lived experience for themselves first, so that they see the why behind well, why you're trying to have this conversation with them.
Yeah, what I think you're pointing to is when do they shift into a growth mindset? And you
Love that.
talk about that in the book, a learning mindset. And once you have someone in that mode of, oh, I may have made a mistake there, I might want to learn from that. That's the perfect time to bring in the principles of your book. So unfortunately, this time always flies and we're going to run out of time. But I want to ask you one final question because, there's a lot of diverse case studies in your book. And you're particularly focused on helping folks that come from marginal populations and are potentially been underserved in our corporate, hierarchies. And I'm just curious, what is your desire for this book? What is your dream for taking this book to the folks that most need it?
I think there is a knowing gap and then a knowing doing gap. And the first step is to just close that knowing gap. There's all these things that people just don't know they don't know, but should know. And all of you as coaches are in some ways trying to solve for that knowing gap, and in some ways also are trying to close that doing gap. It's all a relay race. We're all in this together. I've got my baton and I'm running it as hard and as deliberately as I can. And my hope with this book is that I can hand off a baton or a book to you that helps you do your work better and to help your clients close that knowing gap. But that's where you all come in as coaches, where you're helping them close that knowing doing gap and then hoping to incite some behavior change. So to summarize, I'd say I wanted to spark a conversation, because coming back to the very title of this book, it's the unspoken rule. So I think I would have run my leg of the relay race half successfully if some of these unspoken rules turned to spoken rules, not because they should be instituted, but because we should also question them as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you added that, because part of, I think, where the real impact that your book can have and that we can have as coaches is that if we can become aware ourselves of the dynamics, the hidden, unspoken mythologies that have been around far too long, that have kept too many people from being successful and getting to the pinnacle of their full potential, then we can actually influence the change to make things more, the playing field more accessible and better for everyone. So that to me is the ultimate goal. And that's where this becomes a great tool to help the coaches and the clients all get there. So anyway, it's been a pleasure, and we will keep accepting questions through the chat box. It'll all be on LinkedIn, and Gorick can take some time to answer the rest of your questions. But also, if you have time on March 22nd, the Institute of Coaching is going to host Gorick in a webinar format. So we're going to take a deeper dive into this content, and I hope that many of you will be able to join us then. We're super excited to have you back in a few weeks. And I just want to thank you for being with us, for writing this fabulous book, and for doing what you're doing in the world at Berkeley and at Harvard and wherever else it takes you. But it's really serving an incredibly important and valuable purpose in the world that sorely needs it today. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for writing it.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And every time I look down, I just can't help but smile even more, because all of you who are tuning in and who are serving as coaches, we're all in this relay race together. So I wanted to thank you all as well for tuning in, for sharing your perspective, for running your leg of the relay race and doing it so well.